Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CS Leadership Roundtable. My name is Andrew Marks, co-founder of the Success Coaching Training Program. We're back for our monthly live leadership roundtable today, discussing emotional intelligence and the role it plays in customer success. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training with more than 6,000 graduates globally. Our training programs are available in a variety of formats, including self-paced online learning, virtual instructor-led boot camps, and our hybrid 12-week coaching program where you get to spend 1 hour a week with me to talk about customer success topics. And that program kicks off tomorrow. Our weekly coaching calls don't begin until next week, so it's not too late to join us. You can save $250 by using the coupon code CCSM-250. Ashley will drop a link to the program and the coupon in the chat. We also offer a growing number of standalone courses taught by industry experts, including data-driven decision-making, having difficult conversations, and change management for customer success. You can find out more about our training programs at successcoaching.co. Ashley will also drop the link into the chat. Now, for those of you who haven't participated in one of these before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic relevant to customer success leaders. Regardless of the company that you work for, the scope of your role, or the sizes of the customers your team deals with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. We also encourage you to suggest topics and guests for our program. So reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a note. The schedule for our upcoming CS Leadership Roundtable events can be also found at successcoaching.co under the events tab. As usual, we'll post a replay of this webinar along with a transcription early next week on our website. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. This series allows us to focus on practical, real-world advice, best practices, techniques, and shared experiences from those practicing and leading customer success teams on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 panelists to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people who are great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and their perspectives. We will be taking questions later on during the webinar, so please use that Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. Also, I ask that you please keep all commentary to the chat window. Commentary to the chat window, questions to Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves to y'all, talk a bit about who they are and what they do. As usual, in alphabetical order, let's start with Brian.
Thank you, Andrew, and hello, everybody. Hello, community. My name is Brian Stone. I am the VP of Customer Success at Fair Warning, which as of last December is an Imprivata company. Our solution really helps organizations protect against insider threats. So that's identifying users that are causing data breaches and data loss with some of your most sensitive information. Been with this organization for about 10 years, and during that time, I've led most parts of the pre and post customer journey, and really excited to be here and talk about this topic.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Now on to Daniel.
Thanks, Andrew, and just super happy to be here. My name's Dan Bartucci. I'm Executive Director here at Agio, and I head up our customer success team. At Agio, we are a managed IT and cybersecurity provider. We focus in the financial services, hedge funds, private equities, and in the healthcare space. Customer success critical for us, and I've enjoyed, thankfully, nearly 20 years now in a customer-facing relationship management role. Really happy to be here with my peers and with you, Andrew.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Last but not least, Rebecca.
Nice to be talking with you again, Andrew. I am Rebecca Nerad, the Vice President of Customer Success at E2Open. E2Open is a supply chain planning and execution platform. I have been in customer success in supply chain for 20 years, before we use the term customer success, always in customer-facing roles, making sure that we champion the right outcomes and goals for our customers. I'm super passionate about the topic that we're going to be talking through today.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks you all for making time for us today. Now let's get to the topic at hand. So many elements of emotional intelligence, or EQ, are important to being good at customer success. Self-awareness and self-regulation help us control our emotions and address challenging issues and customer situations in a measured and thoughtful way. Social skills help us interact and communicate more effectively. Motivation keeps us going, supporting the grit we all need to have in this role. And empathy helps us gain and understand other perspectives. So in today's session, I'd like to talk about emotional intelligence and how we as leaders should inspire and coach our teams to improve their EQ and address our customers leveraging these core skills. Now, when I'm asked what the top skills are that a customer success manager should master, time and time again, I fall back to empathy and active listening. Am I over-exaggerating the importance of EQ in customer success?
No, I agree with you, Andrew. To me, it's the number one thing that I hire for. And that's either from other groups within my organization, or in particular for external hires, that empathy and emotional intelligence are at the core. I think we can train a lot of other skill sets. I can even train a CSM on what he or she needs to know in supply chain. And I do think emotional intelligence and empathy, they are things we can work on. They're things we're going to talk about today, right? On how to improve, how to challenge ourselves to improve. But you have to start at a core baseline. That one of the most important skills that CSM has is all those things that you mentioned.
Yeah, there needs to be some foundation, some emotion, right? We're hiring for somebody that's got, it goes beyond just having a pulse, but it's, you have to show some amount of care, right? Some amount of that whatever makes up EQ.
And for as much as we want to build and develop playbooks and structure around best practices, so much of this role really comes from the active listening and the good communication that come along with a high EQ.
Yeah, and I just might add to this in terms of a base skill or a core skill to a successful CSM, like Rebecca mentioned. I think that you have to be so adaptable as a CSM. And I think it gives you that runway to say, if I'm joining a new company or my product knowledge isn't quite there yet, I can leverage this skill to continue to contribute to the team and have immediate success. And so, but then also, once you know the tool, once you're comfortable, things are going to happen, and things aren't, to your point, you can't have a playbook for everything, and this is what gets you through those situations where a playbook does not exist.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, I just to carry that thought further. I mean, we all kind of default to empathy, and I struggle to ever think that that is the ultimate, right? In empathy and active listening, and to understand the client demand or what you need from your team as a leader. But Andrew, you also mentioned self-awareness and the concept of reflection and understanding that this is about continuous improvement in this role. So Brian, you just said it. You might, you're going to pick up the product at some point, but if you're not continuously trying to evaluate yourself or, do an examination, end of a week, end of a meeting, end of a QBR, that's where we start to advance. And I know that's something critical for me. There's no way I know everything about being an emotional, really strong at EQ. So I think that was an excellent point.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca. And then I got a question for you.
I was actually just going to share an example of that, Dan. I think, right, when you're talking about self-awareness, right, which is one of the core parts of emotional intelligence, and it starts with self-examination. So if you're thinking about the skills that either you want to have or you want to coach in your CSMs, it's, why am I feeling that way? Why am I reacting that way? It's like to think about you yourself and how you're engaging with your team members or your customers. I actually did an exercise with my CSMs where I had them think about a future state, think about a challenging relationship that they're having, and think about a future state where you could see that that's better. And if you think about how you can describe it and what that looks like when you do, it all starts by understanding, I don't like dealing with that guy. Oh, it's tough for me to respond to his email. Oh, he's pushing me around, whatever that is. So if they explore and think why do you feel that way? And in fact, I even pushed it to the, what's the future state look like? Then we use language like, I see a time when he trusts the value that I'm adding as a CSM, right? And you're getting to the core of, why am I frustrated? Am I not feeling heard? Am I feeling that he's being impatient? All that really helps inform how we respond.
And that's how we respond to each other, as well as how we respond to our customers, because that self-awareness, that self-control is also very important at the customer level, right? It's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? People get pissed. Misunderstandings happen. We miss deadlines. The customer misses deadlines, and that's a big and really important part of managing a customer.
I'm going to play on the self-awareness, the reflection, and I think it's a great starting point when we explore the topic of EQ. And I have a confession. I've tried the reflection in the past, and I know, like, if you article or Google something, you'll say journaling really helps in the morning or evening, and could not stick to that. There's always an excuse to go do something other. And so, but one thing that I found in terms of maybe a takeaway that worked for me when it comes to reflection is just, if you just change it from journaling to note taking, that really helped me. And you can incorporate that into your 9 to 5 if you want. And that's, as a leader, that really helped me in my one-on-ones, in my customer calls, if I had them, in my executive meetings, just so that I had something to reference. And so I can figure out my contributions, and start to reflect on some of the notes that I took. And I think that helps with reflecting on the interactions throughout the day. So it wasn't quite what Google might recommend, but it helped me kind of baby steps get there to, hey, I am actually reflecting and I'm taking advantage of growing upon each interaction.
And I think too, that we encourage our CSMs to reflect as well. If we're asking them those questions, why did you feel that way? Or how do you think you responded? Or how could you improve, in the future, right? Engaging them instead of just giving them the answer, but encouraging them to think through how a customer would have responded or how someone else would have felt.
That's how I teach my kid. That's how we should teach our kids. Don't give them the answer. Help them understand how they can get to the answer. Right. Yeah. So Rebecca, you said that you hire for emotional intelligence. Can you expand on that? How do you do that? Do you have some key questions that you ask, some exercises that they do? How do you get to that, feeling like, okay, this person has the right EQ for us?
Sure. One of the questions that I like to ask when interviewing a CSM is to share an example of a time when they had to balance the good cop, bad cop interaction. Because in the CSM role, as we all know, you have to advocate for your customers while also accurately representing your company needs. And that often can be a balance. And whether or not the person is in a current customer success role, to be able to relate that sort of example where there were kind of those differing needs. And as they share that story, you can see how they navigated that, what evidence they used, how perceptive they were about the needs of the varying sides when they tell that story.
Yeah, I like that. I like that strategy. Brian, Dan, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think maybe not necessarily a great interview question, but it's, sometimes I found myself lost in interviewing. Hey, can I put this individual in front of my toughest client? I know who our toughest clients are. So let me see how they're going to answer this question. And I know that will work, but it's also so important as a CSM, how you can actually influence internally in your organization, because there will be things that fall out of your control that you need to go help and advocate for your client. So you might be good and you might be able to schmooze in front of the client, but if you can't then go into your delivery or your professional services teams and get influence and buy-in and use your EQ there. So I think often I've, in interviewing CSMs, I've tried to actually see, well, how are you going to interact through service, in these late night escalations, or, Brian, you and I are a little bit in cybersecurity, right? When you have those kind of breaches. So I think that's to look at both sides of it. It's equally important what they say in front of the client and the questions they ask, but also they really need to be able to influence the folks internally that can help the issues.
That's a great call out, Dan.
Yeah.
And also I would share, it also doesn't matter if they're an introvert or an extrovert, right? That I surprised, huge on the extrovert scale, right? But I have seen introverts be just as successful as those that it's the awareness and the communication and the connection, right? It's these that skills that matter more than that kind of personality on the engagement piece.
We talk about that in our training, how, we of course we lead with customer focused training around employing empathy to understand the customer's perspective. But in our level 2, some of our level 2 courses, we specifically call out empathy being this tool that we should use to interact better with the people that support what we're doing for our customers, the folks in support and in engineering and in sales and in finance and to Dan's point in particular, trying to get some of the things done in engineering that need to get done. You put yourself in a much better position when you enter that conversation, understanding how they're going to perceive what you are about to ask them, and then framing that ask around something that's going to be relatable to them and they're going to be more receptive to.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. And Andrew, I just want to add to the interview prep that Rebecca and Dan shared, which great points. I loved it. The one thing that I might share that I look for is I look for the amount of preparation from a candidate. And the reason why is because I think it hits on a lot of EQ points of their self-awareness, their ability to empathize with us. So how much research did they do? What questions are they asking, which is a foundational part of going back to the active listening, Andrew, of your opening. So the level of preparation is something that I kind of like score for a new candidate to give them an overall EQ evaluation. But
yeah, so not just how they're answering questions, but what questions are they asking? Right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because they're supposed to relate to us just as much, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they need to be doing their research, right? They need to understand us, right? So the better they understand you, what they walk in, better they understand what you do, or at least take a stab at what you do, right? The more likely they are to have been employing some of that empathy that we want them to employ.
Still the hardest question. So what do we do, right? During the interview process, no matter how much you prepare.
Yeah, exactly. Just a reminder, we do have one question. Go ahead and submit your questions. We'll get to them in a few minutes here. But before we do, I got a question for the panel. All right, we talked about hiring emotional intelligent folks. How should we go about coaching our team members to become more emotionally intelligent, or flex those muscles that may be kind of atrophying a little bit? How do we get them thinking that way? Rebecca, you mentioned an exercise that you did, but any thoughts, any best practices on how do we get people to understand how important EQ is and start applying and make sure they're applying it with every customer interaction?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts I had to that question. One, if we value EQ so much, we have to think about that when we deploy KPIs for our CSM, right? So we're going to be short-lived if we deploy that KPI that is either an NRR number only or a revenue growth number only, because they're going to go out, no matter how much I think we can coach them, and know to hit that top 2. So you're going to have to find some soft metrics. I think one of the things that we did recently is we've employed a little bit more team practice. So even going back, Brian and Rebecca, around the self-awareness. Okay, I want all of us to get together as a team and I want, we're going to rotate through, and this CSM is up, and you're going to go through the monthly service review, and everybody else is going to act and give the objections. And that's a little way to coach. It's hard always to pitch internally, but I think just practice as a team too is a good way to try to get that out of them and help coach them.
Practice, role play, whatever. Just we actually have a couple of different role play exercises where it really kind of tests your EQ abilities with what could be perfect strangers. So, I
think
what do you got, Rebecca?
The fundamental point to me, I mean, when we talk about EQ, it's the idea of being balanced, of being open-minded, and part of that is dealing with criticism. So when I think about how to coach our CSMs, that's one that I want to think about, like where I work with them to say, here is this, maybe the customer was frustrated or they got feedback from an internal team member, and to work with them to use that example, right? Understand the context, admit a mistake, and also the ability to let go and move on. These are all parts of emotional intelligence, so that we as leaders need to take those examples, not just to say, it's okay, right? But to work through understanding the perspective when they do get feedback that's less than perfect, how they feel about it, what they want to do about it. But again, it's that context, and then owning their truth. Right. And another part of emotional intelligence is being aware of our true selves, right? What are our strengths and our weaknesses? And that we as leaders can create an environment where the CSMs feel safe to say,
right. Yeah.
To say, it's okay. I have one CSM who says, I'm not technical. And I used to be afraid to say that. And now I know, that is okay. That's not my strength. I work very closely with our customer success engineers or whoever to support me, but to know where she's strong, to find value in that. Again, that comes back to that awareness piece too.
Brian, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I would just kind of compliment Rebecca on your statement. I think that's a really good point of as a leader, creating an environment where it's safe to share and safe to have those conversations is a really great point. So no matter what we do, if you don't have that, then it's kind of counterproductive. But the one thing that I just might share, and it's a little bit to tag along both what Dan and Rebecca said, is trying to lead by example. And one of those things for me, and there's a lot of different other best practices that you can apply, but for me, a foundation is just asking questions. And in one-on-ones that I have with my team members is I try to measure, I just have to ask questions and keep probing and help guiding them through questions, not through direction. And so for me, it's if I can show the example of just asking questions, that's, I feel like, a big foundation to active listening, to EQ in general. And so if I'm doing that on my interactions at every level, I hope that my team will pick up on that and carry that from a coaching and development. And if you can do that, you can do a lot of things to build on top of it.
For sure. Brian, how does that make you feel? No, anyways, so
fantastic. Thumbs up.
That's good. So you bring up the point we should lead by example. So how can we be more emotionally intelligent with our teams, right? How can we show them that it's okay? You want to lead by example. You want to demonstrate that this is a safe place. That begins with you as leaders. So how do you go about doing that?
One area where I think I've improved as a leader over time, as a younger manager, I felt like it was important to, and even as an individual contributor, say, "Oh, I got this. You can pile as much of my plate as you want, and I'm strong and I can handle it. Like no flaws." And I realized the importance of showing vulnerability and talking about and articulating some of what I'm struggling to balance and how I'm prioritizing or what I'm working through, because that that opens up a better conversation with you and your teams than when they're feeling overwhelmed, when they're having a hard time self-motivating sometimes, that they will be more comfortable or struggling with what you've overloaded with them, but you don't even know. If you start from that place of, vulnerability and openness, they're more likely to share themselves.
Yeah, agreed. And owning your mistakes and owning the challenges and that sort of thing, being transparent. Go ahead, Dan. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it, right, Andrew? Right? Just owning your mistakes and doing that in a public setting, I think, is important with your team too, right? You can do it in a one-on-one with one of your leaders or one of your CSMs, but say, hey, I got this one wrong, right? I thought we had the right approach here. I thought I had this interaction right. And that should hopefully, Rebecca, to your point, give your team the ability to come to you and not say, hey, I don't know this, or I feel I don't know this. It would be the worst if we onboarded new CSMs and nobody told us that our onboarding was awful, right? That we missed this, or they didn't know the expectation. So I think, not in a shaming manner, but I think, owning it and just being accountable for yourself is that even if it's, somebody on the team that's made a mistake, just that will help them get that level of trust, I think, to kind of continue to develop.
And it should go without saying, but I have, fortunately or unfortunately, over the last 2.5 decades, worked with just tons of people, tons of leaders that don't grok that don't own it, that look for people to throw under the bus, and it's just it's frustrating. It's just such a bad practice, and it really it demonstrates that you are not a leader. Demonstrates you're just a bad manager. Okay, before we jump into some of these questions, one more thing that I want to touch on, which we've all had to experience and adjust to over the last 18 months, right? How do you manage and act being emotionally intelligent in this new virtual environment? And more importantly, how do you do that and make sure that your team is doing that?
Yeah, Andrew, to jump in there, being a little bit of, having a couple of jobs on Wall Street, right? We got away for so many years with the Thursday social happy hour or the stereotypical steak dinner and cigars in New York City, but we're all going through this. Right? No one is a CSM right now that has lived through a global pandemic, and in our country where 600,000 people have passed away. So people you're interacting with have been affected directly. So I think you have to just be clear and own the awkwardness of this. And with the CSMs, find the ways to be present, right? Turning the video camera on, pausing a little bit more in this video world. And also, we've lost a little bit of the time to be social, right? How are your kids doing? Where are they applying? Kids are going back to school here at this time. So give yourself a 5-minute buffer in a Zoom meeting where people are showing up and being quick, and just in that, I don't want to say force it, but have it as part of the agenda. Make time for it. It's a little uncomfortable and weird on video, but we still have to build the relationship in the new medium. And I'm sure Rebecca and Brian, we've talked about it. We're all in the same boat.
Yeah, make time for the small talk, right?
Yeah.
Connect with people. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, I want to play on the meeting portion of it, especially we probably all came from one, we're on one, we're going to go to one after this. I will say, I think meetings have gotten a bad rap. And I think a lot of that falls on us as leaders, because it's our responsibility to make meetings, even whether it's in person or virtual, meaningful. And just for me, one thing that I just started practicing during the pandemic, the remote work, is taking these a little bit more serious, more thoughtful. With the mentality of, what if all my meetings were optional and people could not attend, even my direct reports? And so it put that responsibility on me to build content that people would want to look forward to. And so tying it into emotional intelligence, it made me prepare more. It made me share out information ahead of time. It made me share my notes during the meeting to create more of engagement. It also allowed me, from an empathetic standpoint, is to rely on other people to contribute. It wasn't just me speaking, and it wasn't just me taking up a certain amount of time. it really forced me to be more engaging. And so bringing in the note-taking or self-reflection, bringing in the preparedness of knowing my audience, but then also the empathetic part of it of, let other people contribute. It's not just always me. And so that's one thing that I've really tried to incorporate and tying it back to lead by example. If I'm doing that, I hope my other directs are doing that with whether their reports or even in customer interactions. So that's just one way that I've incorporated EQ in a remote world.
Brian,
Go ahead, Dan.
No, I was just gonna say, Brian, I love the pre-read. I love the pre-reads.
Yeah.
And getting more interactive content, right? We've lost the social cue. We're not physically present to see somebody on their phone.
Yeah.
And you don't know if they're ingesting the content. You don't know if their camera's off because their kid is running through the living room and they're trying to make working from home golf.
Yeah.
I love that thought of just incorporating more interaction to do inside the meeting. I'm sorry, Rebecca, I cut you off.
No,
well, and just one thing on that, if I can add on that, is if you take out, if you think of it, and this is basic meeting stuff, but I think it ties to it. If we talking about personal stuff, but I think you can still develop a relationship talking about work stuff, and you're not reading out what could be in an email. And I know that's basic stuff, but you can talk, whether it's personal and then transition into work, but it's that discussion that we're missing that try and force during these calls. Sorry, Rebecca.
No, that's great points. And I really appreciate what you said, Brian, about right, the idea of if this meeting was optional. I actually grabbed a pen to write that to make sure to capture that one.
I probably stole that. So I don't know who the reference is, but I stole it from some article. But
no, that's a great point. For me, one thing I would add is the idea of empowerment. Empowering your CSMs. And the phrase that I find myself using a lot is this the right use of your time? And I can help them judge that if they aren't sure, but so that it's okay that they do not need to attend those meetings, which aren't the right use of their time. And that they are mindful about, we only have so many hours that we are dedicated to work. And it's easy in the customer success space to fall in this place where you're just kind of doing maybe more repetitive work or you're looking at data, but the so what, all of those things, what's the purpose of this message that I'm sharing? Does it matter to my customer? Is this going to make a difference to my customer if I do or don't do this, or to my company? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big piece of it too. As our days have shifted, and because there's the expectation now that everybody's available all the time. I used to travel, so it used to be you aren't quite sure, and now if it's the assumption that it's okay to fill your calendar. So that's another thing. Take back your own time. Be mindful about what you do with your calendar and with what your team does, and communicate directly with them about what that means. I may have some tentative things that are tentatively accepted on my calendar. My team knows that it's okay to work with me about that, right? But if it's a hard block, it's hard, and just being mindful about that, and talking with your team about the rules of that sort of calendaring and carving out the space that they need to do their work.
So there is this perspective that everyone's available all the time, right? But I think you touched on a bunch of stuff there. I'm trying to kind of wrap this up in a bow so we can get to the questions. But I think what's really important is that you as leaders are empowering your CSMs to control their calendar, right? And ask, like you said, ask those questions. Do I need to be at this meeting? It's okay if you're not there. Time is a finite resource. Right. And what this, I don't look at what's happened and all the adoption of work from home, meaning that we're available all the time. I look at it as the ultimate work-life balance. I'm able to schedule my day around my life. Right. And that means I'm going to forego certain things. I'm going to push things till later. I'm going to adjust things. But the key, I think, for everybody to remember, every leader that's on this call, is it's so important that you are explicitly empowering your team members to control their own schedule. One of the things that we do when we roll out a new team subscription, we just did this earlier this week with one of our new customers, is we talked about the importance of CSMs carving time out every week on their calendar for learning and development. And the rule is, which was heartily endorsed by the leadership team, the rule is if you need to if something takes priority during that time slot, the rule is you can't delete it. You have to move it. Own your schedule. I think we place these artificial pressures on ourselves when we lose control of our schedule. So, anyways, let's get to some questions. And by the way, for those of you that are just joining us for the first time, we'll get through a bunch of these questions. We do not end at the top of the hour. We'll go 15 minutes beyond the top of the hour. So if you can stick around, we'll continue to answer questions during that time.
Hey, Andrew, can I ask, can I steal it and ask maybe the first question as a follow-up to your last comment and maybe get the panel's feedback?
Sure. Go for it,
So,
Brian.
I love the calendar protection. I get it. The one thing, how do you as a CSM, because I think a lot of us as you know, CSMs, we want to portray maybe availability to our customers. We want to be at their kind of becking call. But how do you balance then that perception or that desire with the not having the back-to-backs, and how do you balance that with managing my calendar so I'm not burnt out? And that just for anybody, really.
I mean, I use Calendly. I block out certain times of the week. There are certain days that are just off limits for me for people booking meetings. And once again, this is my perspective as a small business owner, but I'm freaking everything from operations to customer success to sales to what have you. So I got lots of people trying to get my time. I block out certain times on my calendar as available for meetings every single day. Well, not even 4 days a week. And so you're showing, and by providing that link, I'm giving people the option to book time. I'm showing that I'm available.
I mean, it starts with, it is a matter of setting boundaries. But part of this comes back to trust too. Andrew was just saying, you make yourself available. So you do meet with the customer. You want to meet with them. You show them that you do. When you make a commitment, you honor it, and you're there at the meeting time. That sounds basic, but that creates the structure when it's okay if you aren't available in that moment, unless it's some urgent production down issue, which should be really the exception. And hopefully you have global support, not necessarily the CSM aligned with that. But it's a matter of respect that the CSM is asking for him or herself by carving that out. And the other thing that it does, it speaks well that the CSM is then standing up for their calendar, also their commitments to another customer. This may not be the only customer that they're taking care of. And part of that calendar, part of being not available every minute, means that they are taking care of themselves, educating themselves with what they need at the company, also other customers. So that doesn't mean being available at every split second when the customer, like the idea of beck and call actually made me say, like, no, for as much as being responsive matters, there are boundaries to what that means.
And even if you've at least made the attempt to show that you've got availability, there's nothing stopping the customer saying, I can't find something. And if you feel that it's that important, you at least have the control of saying, hey, listen, I can carve some special time out for you. What if we do it this time?
But it starts from responsive in the first place. You need to have a relationship where the CSM is responding to the email, is trying to make a time to meet, right? Yeah. You can't just start by not even addressing, right? That's how you build the trust to be able to find the right time. Dan.
Agreed. Dan, you got anything to add to this?
I was hoping I dodged this because I'm awful. And I feel, and again, this is so self-awareness, self-reflection. Brian, I didn't journalist, but what hit me last week was somebody on my team came to me and said, hey, I just need 10 minutes, but I know you're jammed. And I'm like, that's what I don't want to portray. So I know I could be better about calendar. I would say there are people now, because of maybe just their work for home environment. I know a lot of people on my team kind of shift hours. I've tried to encourage designating when you need something. So there's some people that, are going to have to run out. You're going to have a CSM that maybe had something home with their kids, and they go back online and they start working at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Yes, we want to make sure they're protected, but that's what they could do. That's what they're going to do. But just say, if you're communicating, hey, this is for tomorrow. So my operations leader, she's in Colorado Springs. I know she's going to be online, but please read this tomorrow, right? I just had a minute to post this tonight. So I think as long as you're clear communicating with your team, but self-awareness, I'm not talking about calendar, because I have 4 back-to-back after this, and I need to be better. I need to be better. There's no question.
Dan, I want to jump into your point, though, that it's, again, back to the communication and understanding that you set with your team. I have a colleague who she'll draft a bunch of emails that don't send until the next day, and that's the way that she wants to send during their workday. I don't feel like that works for me, because I have people around the globe, and by the time it sends out, there might have been other things. So I communicate that importance of, just because I choose to send, I'm always on at 10 p.m. I like that. I mean, that works for me, because I choose to have my dinner with my family, right? Whatever works for me. But just because you receive an email at 10 p.m. does not mean respond to it. My team, my director. And so that matters. And I have to be very cautious if it's going to others, that they also might understand that, or when do I choose to send it? All those things matter.
One other thing that matters is what habits are, or what expectations are we setting with our customers, right? So, if an SLA is 24 hours, but you constantly respond after 15 minutes, what you're doing is you're creating a customer's expectation that you're going to respond after 15 minutes, right? So once again, are we creating this pressure on ourselves? Are we creating that problem, right? Are we, or are we setting boundaries and setting appropriate expectations and trying to manage them? I love the idea of, I've coached people before doing this, of not responding in 15 minutes if it's not critical, and responding after, within that more like 18 to 24 hour time frame, if that's the SLA, so that customers don't think that, every time I send a note to somebody, I'm going to get an immediate response. So let's jump to some of these questions. Cecilia got a lot of upvotes. I've experienced this myself as well. What is your strategy for dealing with leadership that may not have their EQ attuned? I think every leadership role I ever sat in, I had peers on my leadership team that just were, their EQ was non-existent. So how do you deal with that?
I'll jump in and share my perspective. One of the big things that I think as a CS leader is being data driven, and whether it's the KPIs, I think we can't control our peers' EQ level. But what we can do is communicate, is empathize in how we communicate what we want to them. And what I've found, instead of just complaining about a feature or functionality or a support ticket or something, I've really tried to leverage data in all aspects of my customers and activity, and communicate. That's the language that I use to communicate the product, the support, the finance, to help get them to understand and prioritize. So becoming very data driven and communicating using that data is how I've been able to communicate with those that I've kind of said, your EQ is maybe not where I want it to be, or where we should be. So
you literally, and this is something I coach people on all the time, you literally take the emotion out of the discussion, and stick to the facts. Yeah,
exactly. Then it's not my It's not subjective.
My opinion, it's right.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, it's
and it could be NPS comments. It could be scores. It could be the app exchange. Whatever your source is, but leverage that information to help advocate your message internally.
Yeah,
and employ empathy.
Yep.
And to employ empathy to think about the perspective of the person you're messaging to, whether they have EQ or not, and how can I as best as possible, frame this narrative in a way that's going to be as receptive as possible.
I think that's a really good point, because if you, in an example that we've done, if there's a product metric that they're tracking and you can see that that's not being adopted, then there's a connection there that you can empathize with their measurement or their KPI using customer data. And you're just kind of that middle person transferring that information to really help them understand the customer base. But good point.
Yeah. Dan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, Brian, I was just going to Brian and Andrew are like just outstanding points. So somebody asked for a book earlier on just around this, and I'm going to blank on the author, but Made to Stick is the title, but it really helps you get through taking that data, and I'm a data junkie, but just effectively communicating it upstream to the leadership team, where it has that effect of not shock and awe, but wow, this is the metric we have to go address. And I would say the other kind of strategy, but I'm a little spoiled because some folks in our leadership team are just incredibly emotionally intelligent. State the problem, right? Sometimes as CS leaders, we go in and we go, hey, this is in a really bad state and we need to do X, Y, and Z. We need to automate this ticket workflow. We need to do this in professional service. But when you're talking with your peers in the leadership or even upstream, just state the problem. This is what the client feels as a problem statement. I'm not getting this in this amount of time. And then let that go to work. So it just takes some of the opinionating out of it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, Made to Stick by Chip Heath, which the Heath brothers are the authors of Switch, which is a great book on change management.
I was actually going to say, I can point behind me to some of these books as we talk about. I think, but back to using data, Brian, I mean, first of all, if you're at a company where across the board, your leadership really shows no emotional intelligence, that's something I would really have to consider. I mean, that's really difficult, because to not be able to show any, like to have any influence or feel like you're coming, I mean, that's a difficult space to be in. Thank you for the question. I think the way that we address this, ironically, is by really being sharp about our own EQ, just like Brian said, what matters to those people. And the more empathy you can use to see what they want to know and want to see, and likely if you can use data and serve to answer that, then that is actually how you will get them to, that's how you will be heard. Whether or not they actually show that in response to you or show emotional maturity, that's a difficult thing to be able to break. But for you to be successful, right, the idea is understanding what matters to them.
And hopefully people like that are in the minority on your e-staff team.
Hey, Andrew, one last thing. I think a little further down, Jason asked, like, breaking down silos. I think even though another business unit might have high EQ, I think using data is also another opportunity to maybe break down those silos and improve that cross-functional communication. They'll view that information as valuable, and hey, where did you grab this? And gives you opportunities to connect with those other business units.
Yeah, once again, employing those same tools that we employ to try and understand the customer's perspective, we should be doing with peers in our organization.
Yeah.
Right. How is this going to be the best received? And it doesn't. It's not. There's very few things that you need to immediately have to talk about, right? You can take some time to take a step back and think about, how do I want to convey this based on what I know about this individual, or what their what motivates them? What is their desired outcomes, right? How do I want to message what I'm about to message? Especially if it's something that they might not be, they might not want to hear.
Also remembering that there's some audience who they really want and need the detail to be able to believe and trust what you're saying. You may need to get, support to put that together, and others just need to make sure, right? So you need to think about your audience and what they may need to hear as part of the communication too.
Exactly. Awesome. Cecilia, thank you for the question. Next up is Julie. Julie asks, what do you recommend for some emotionally intelligent KPIs? And it looks like Rebecca wants to jump in first on this. Rebecca, what have you got for Julie?
I think this one's tough because obviously gross customer retention is going to continue to be an important metric for CSMs. For me, though, I recommend some element of proactive engagement to improve the customer's perception of value. So however that looks like for your company, is it driving increased adoption and usage? Is it that you're capturing the data and the trends? Is it that you're defining business outcomes? But that, as a KPI, the CSM's ability to navigate this, to really drive outcomes, which is what our goal really is in customer success, all of those things, to do that well requires a strong EQ, because it's not just knowing the data and the metrics, it's being able to communicate it in a way that matters to the customer, so that fundamentally the customer is successful. And that comes from, engaging with them, even when you pull together metrics, having the conversations on, is this useful? And that's how you're building trust and making sure they're getting value out of the solution. So to me, it's having a piece that's related more to that value outcome side instead of just related to retention.
So we've achieved value, maybe we've demonstrated value, but have we really disseminated that value? Have we communicated that value?
I might just add to that. I think you mentioned it. We have a CS software tool, and I think for us, it's just tracking active success plans. And so that's in our definition, that's a CSM being able to understand what their desired outcomes are, documenting it. So, and then seeing how many active we had per CSM. That's a pretty easy way for us to do it.
Awesome. Dan, anything to add?
No, spot on. You have to find some form of success criteria that your CSM can roll out with their clients, either on onboarding or on renewal phase. And that helps continue to drive the story around value and not just the data, the health score, which is also impactful. But yeah, I think those were well said.
I also caution against using customer satisfaction and just NPS when it comes to evaluating CSMs, because sometimes you need your best CSMs to handle the grumpiest, most difficult customers. Yeah. And so if you're giving them the ones whose NPS is low because you need to, because that's the best way to serve them, then it wouldn't be a fair way to measure them. So if that is a metric that your company is using, consider improvement, from one year to the next when assigned to the same CSM, but be really mindful about when it's about when in that timeline you're expecting certain things from the CSM.
And that actually dovetails nicely into this next question from Cecilia. Rebecca, and if you would hit done on Julie's question for me, thank you. Cecilia, who's got a number of great questions here, asks, and this is another popular upvoted question, do you use any EQ metric during performance reviews? Are they qualitative or quantitative? Would love to hear more about this. Do you use any of that during your standard performance reviews with your team? Any of you?
Celia's asking all the tough questions.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I don't know if this will help from a CSM perspective, but aligning to your core culture or your core values. So we have a few, whether it's about continuous improvement or being better or being bigger than your job. We've evolved this over some years, but we've used that in performance reviews. So how well aligned and tuned to the culture are you here internally that's going to go out to clients? I don't know if I have a quantitative one. I don't know, Rebecca or Brian, if you might. The data is a hard one to put together on this one.
I don't. For me, I use it every day. I use it almost every time I'm having a meeting with the global team, like referencing coaching CSMs on it. But as far as a performance metric, I don't have one mapped directly to it. I mean, to me, it's almost like if you don't have a stronger EQ or show empathy, you're not going to be successful on the team. I don't mean that in a threat. I mean, like, that's what you need fundamentally to be successful at the role.
Yeah, I think of the entire performance review experience from the individual contributor's perspective as is a big experiment in EQ, right? Around, I mean, just think about self-awareness is one of the 5 components that makes up EQ. So when I'm doing a performance review, I'm always keeping in mind, okay, is this person aware of their strengths as well as their weaknesses? And are we talking about those during the performance review?
I wouldn't have anything to add in addition to what everybody else said. So,
all right, awesome. All right, let's Cecilia, thank you again for the questions. And by the way, just a reminder, stick around if you can. We're going to go till 15 minutes past the hour. Also, I forgot to mention, we are on LinkedIn Live. If you are watching on LinkedIn Live and you have a question, you can submit a question right there on LinkedIn Live, and we have somebody monitoring that, and we'll place your question into our question queue. Jason, Daniel, you volunteered to answer this next question from Jason, and I know you started to a bit ago, but what are your tips and tricks for being successful internally in organizations that have silos for departments and a lot of red tape to access those resources that you need to influence? Any other tips, tricks, best practices that you want to share, Dan, or anybody else?
Yeah. Jason, thanks for using my word influence against me. Now I have to recall that frame of thought. So good repeating. So I'm going to say that what is a given is empathy, right? So there always has to be this function of, yes, you can be empathetic with your clients, but when you go to your head of service delivery, that is a human being as well, and might have other factors and, again, other metrics to be measured to. So the 2 things I would say is credibility. So you have to build credibility for your CSMs and your CSM team. So if you need to go scramble the jets and wake up the entire executive team and get resources to fix a client problem, it should be a real client problem. And that helps anytime then your clients come back with negative your CSMs come back with negative sentiment, is that credibility. And I found that the best way to get that credibility, to the next part of that, is you have to coach your CSMs to ask the right questions. So, when we've coached new CSMs that come in, they're great. They do active listening in front of a client unloads on them, and then they just turn around and unload in an open, broad setting. And even if you have that buy-in from delivery, from your development team, they're going to go, well, what's next? Okay, I want to go fix it. I trust you guys. You guys are awesome. I'm paid on retention too. So make sure, or we want to make sure that our CSMs come back with, so we've earned that credibility. And now we're actually going to say, hey, they actually need this. The client just needs this. They just need a phone call. They just need this project to complete next week. And I think that continues to evolve. But if you bring in that CSM, we talked about hiring before, that is great. The client loves them because they respond in 5 minutes. But when they respond, they turn around and they go, yeah, that person that answers support desk is an idiot. Yeah, I hear you. You have every right to be upset. They don't know what they're doing. That's not the way to get to it either. So if you can find the credibility and a quick and easy, this is what we need, I think that helps. But it's always a continuing thing that you have to work on.
One of my main recommendations is to use the customer's language when you're talking internally to the team, but most importantly, when the customer can hear it too. So let's say you're in a meeting that has your customer and another internal advocate, maybe somebody from development or support or a product are there. That you can represent the customer's needs, that they hear you advocating and using the why it matters to them, that you may know that it's, because they need to get a report to their boss. But even better if you can actually convey the outcome that is influenced if we don't do this, right? In the supply chain space, it may be that their forecast accuracy is off, or that there are trucks at a dock door. Sorry, too much supply chain. But the impact, when the customer hears you saying it in a way that is their impact, they know that they are feeling heard. You know the impact, and you're trying to convey that to your organization. That matters a lot.
Brian, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I just might play on so one example that I would have is understanding the KPIs for other departments. And that's understanding like how are they measured within the organization to be successful. And so communication, credibility, what the team said, also mapping what your recommendations are to see how they support their initiatives. I think that's one way. And then the other one would be kind of the other direction of be an advocate for that silo or business unit. If you can communicate initiatives, if you know and you can communicate initiatives to your direct reports to your CSM team, and then have them participate. So communicate and educate your team on what that unit is doing, their initiatives, get them excited about it because you're their cheerleader, but then also maybe even open up the door to invite them to kind of socialize or partake in some meetings or events that you have. So you have to take the initiative to kind of break down those silos a little bit. And you can do that through initiatives and kind of proactively inviting them to kind of your silo. And then hopefully it's not a silo after that.
Actually, great point. And I was going to bring that up and you beat me.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I love that. It's something that we talk about in communicating effectively with other teams in our level 2, how you need to be the one that makes the first move, right? So you want to break down silos. Don't wait until you need something, right? Go and offer something to them. If it's marketing, offer them some white papers, some customer success stories. If it's engineering, hey, I've got a friendly customer who would love to share some of the feedback about this new product feature. If it's sales, hey, we just learned a bunch of FUD about our competition. Would you like to meet and talk about it? You give them something, right? But you have to be the one with that high EQ that we've got. You have to be the one that makes the first move. Right? But I love everything that you're talking about, that all you talked about, the credibility, the employing empathy. To understand the perspective of the people that we're speaking with better, storytelling. How do I craft a story using the customer's own language to make it relatable and also really impress on the receiver of that message, the impact that it has. And then Brian, which you led with earlier, as well as now data. Use data to back those things up. That makes it really hard for those silos to stay up when you take that approach. Dan, can you hit done on that question? Thanks, Jason, for that question. Let's get to the next one here. Carol Ann asks, we want our CSMs to be invested in our customers' success and to help them gain value, leading them with a high level of EQ. Given there are many factors that can contribute to churn outside of CS control, what advice do you give to your team members who are dealing with EQ to also not take it personally if they do fail? I just tell them not to take it personally. Did you do everything that you could? Right? Did you? Yeah. I mean,
can I?
Yeah.
It's not great. It's not a great answer, but continue doing what you're doing, because if it's out of your control, I think being aware that it's out of your control, go on to the next customer. I think it kind of plays into cross-functional collaboration, which was some of the other questions that were asked. But I think being invested in, I think there's kind of, I don't know the best answer on this one, except, hey, it's great you're aware of it, but there's so much you can do. Move on to the next one and see if you can change that next outcome.
I think part of it comes with that, again, if you as a leader are showing real emotional intelligence and awareness that they're frustrated, that you're hearing them out and listening, and you don't have a culture of blame. So if you let them know like that is okay, that is happening, that you are showing that, right, it's okay that this does happen. And it can be either they made a mistake, something happened, or even just customers churn for reasons that are entirely outside of their control. When it comes to a metrics part, as an aside, I do like to have some exceptions for something that is so far beyond the CSM's control that they wouldn't be hitting a KPI at it, right? If it's a merger or acquisition or something, there is no way that they could have saved a customer. By the way, I do think that's a nice piece, but really we're talking about here is engaging so that customer. And I think, Brian, your answer, moving on, that shows, that's a sign of showing emotional intelligence too, right? The CSM's ability to not dwell and fester on that, and the ability to let go and move to the next.
Yeah.
But that also requires people to be self-aware enough to own when they've screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think we set an example for not just others on our team, but others in the entire company when we own our mistakes, when we own our deficiencies. Right? Because if we're owning when we screw up, then we're setting a bar, we're setting an expectation that others in other organizations that actually may be more responsible, like a gap in the product or misset expectation in the marketing or sales process. If we've owned up, they should be owning up as well.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think, Brian, you kind of touched on it, but it was, taking it personally, give it some closure. Have a great manager who actually just weaves into the conversation. And this is, for lack of a better word, the last time we're going to talk about it. Yes, with this account, you did everything great. I'm real proud of you. There was nothing you were going to do to turn it around. And again, I'm paraphrasing, and this is the end of talking about it. So on the next one-on-one, please, right, you're not going to bring up, I can't believe I lost this, right? How am I going to get this NRR back? So I found, if you can find a way, and everybody's company is different, but just give it closure. It's gone. I mean, we all have lost promoter clients. They're not coming back in most of the time, right? So we have to kind of let that go through to our teams too.
I might add one last, just from a process standpoint, and love that comment of how do you get closure on it? It could be your manager or leader giving you that opportunity. And I know a lot of CS organizations probably already do this, but having closed loss analysis with other key stakeholders, that's also a process-driven event that can maybe kind of definitively close out the tenure of that customer and allow you to kind of move on to the next one.
Yeah, you ever have an opportunity to perform one of those analysis, or have a third party do it for you. Take advantage of it, whatever it costs you, especially if it's a large customer. Right? It's a tremendous amount of value you get from that.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks for that question. Next one comes from Caitlin. We've got about 3 minutes, so I'm going to try and get through as many of these as we can. Caitlin asks, what are some tips for playing good cop, bad cop in an ever-growing, changing, data-driven tech company? Anybody got something quick to throw at Caitlin? Quick best practice. Come on. Good cop, bad cop.
I wouldn't, in a tech company, being in a tech company, I would be okay with acknowledging that technology is going to fail at some point and not try to be around that. Tell your clients that.
Okay.
I think it's the willingness to say, to draw that balance between, let's say engineering says, well, it was working as designed, and you feel like, well, the design sucked. And so how can you actually but conveying that in a genuine way that says, I hear you, I understand, here's the limitations of what we can do, what are our options to get past it. Again, it comes through, opening up a conversation, but which follows understanding the problem, understanding why the customer is frustrated in the first place.
You just lost all the developers on the call, Rebecca.
I just want to let you know, Rebecca, that I'm self-aware enough to realize that I've actually had that response more than once. Well, the design sucks. I love that. That's awesome. Brian, you got anything to add?
I would say ask more questions. So in your you don't have to define it as bad cop, good cop. Just keep trying to discover. And if they express something, I would just say keep digging, keep asking questions, keep trying to understand the point of view of the customer.
I also think I'm going to add one more to this before we get into the next question. I also think it's important, when you're playing a bad cop, you're essentially telling somebody no, right? You're giving somebody bad news. I think that it's, and we actually teach this for customers, but you need to do this with your own internal team as well. Pull people into your decision-making process, pull them closer, help them understand how you are coming up with this assessment of the bad cop. Help them understand that. Awesome. Caitlin, thank you. Let's see. Vinny asks, what resources, books, courses, or anything else would be helpful with EQ that you all would recommend? Okay, my number one, and people who are familiar with the program, especially recently, I've been pushing Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. It is on. Yeah, Rebecca, it's a book about negotiation, but he really dives into a lot of the core elements of EQ and how you can leverage those skills to open up a channel of communication with anybody, which is a big part of negotiation. When he's a former FBI hostage negotiator, and the book is written, talking about some of his stories in hostage negotiations, but also framing some examples from a business perspective. So that's my top, at the top of my list these days.
I'm a CS leader with a sales background, so I'll promote Sales EQ by Jeb Blunt.
Awesome. Sales EQ by Jeb Blunt. Hey, Ashley, you got to write these all down so we can add them as recommended reading. Rebecca, you got something? You got a whole pile of books back there. You got to have one on EQ.
I know. Well, that's my problem is I have a couple different colleagues who've written some books on EQ, so I don't know who to peg without getting it. So my answer is going to be the best exercise is actually to challenge yourself to be a better listener, whether or not you want to journal yourself. If you take the time to be reflective and to be willing to admit where you could improve yourself, that would be one of the best lessons on becoming more emotionally intelligent.
Awesome. Finally, Daniel, anything to add?
Yeah, I hit up in the chat. I'm a Simon Sinek junkie, so I think I can't go wrong there. I have a small bookshelf there. Again, the Made to Stick I mentioned, Eat the Frog's a good one. It's kind of struggling, so and something not in business. I at least try to balance something in business and then have a book that's not, even if it's fiction.
I like that. Yeah. And reading business books gets a little boring. So awesome. Well, we're at the end of our webinar. I know we've got a bunch of unanswered questions. I'm sorry. Join us again. Hopefully we'll get to them. But I think the webinar went well, but it's not what I think, it's what all of you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging us, one of us, all of us. I want to thank my amazing panel of guests for spending the time with us today, as well as our prep call earlier this week. We all very much appreciate the time that you're making in your schedule to provide these insights and best practices that you shared. One final note, great CS leaders know they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. So we hope, once again, you got something out of this discussion, and we'll see you at our next event on October 13th, when we'll discuss the psychology of deriving value solutions for customer success. This should be a rather interesting discussion. So check us out at successcoaching.co to find out more and sign up. Until we see you again, have a great rest of your day, week, and month. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone.